Phyllis's next guest, Carl Studna, is world-renowned for his remarkable photographs of influential people, from the Dalai Lama to Paul McCartney. He is also a respected teacher, speaker, and inspirational leader. His newest book is Evolution of Loving.
The evolution of loving. Why this particular subject and why this book?
Well, this book has such deep meaning and significance for me. It actually began 25 years ago when I was sitting in a hot tub with Kenny Loggins. And he was giving me an idea. He planted the seed for this book because at the time he was married to his wife, Julia, and they were deeply in love. And he was just in this deep love zone. And so this idea of photographing couples that are deeply in love and getting beautiful, intimate photographs. And then what I brought to it as it evolved was deep interviews with each couple. And the end result is far beyond what I could have imagined 25 years ago.
Is it possible that you got into their lives easily, or was it a difficult process to get that intimacy that I've seen in your book?
You know, I feel like every part of the process of working on that project, I was in this sort of synchronistic kind of zone. It's like a love zone. So I would be putting it out. I had this blank book that I bought at an art supply store, and I would literally be cutting and pasting people's pictures as I went along and some of their text. And I brought it with me everywhere I went. So it was really like my Bible. And I was so enthusiastic and my heart was just so deeply into it that everyone I spoke with, the perfect people gave me the perfect referrals. So if I was looking for an older couple that had been together most of their lifetime, then someone says, you know this couple, Carl and Walter, in Hawaii, and they're just an extraordinary couple. They've been together. They were refugees from Germany during the war, and they had been through a lot, and they had such a deep regard for each other and for gratitude for being alive and for all their children. And so every couple came to me from the perfect resources and in the perfect timing. And I really went for a lot of diversity. As I kept moving with it, it gained more momentum, and I realized I want to get as much diversity as I can to represent as many people so that the readers can have as great identification as possible with this. And that's what happened. You know, I was presented to the perfect young people, the perfect people that were pregnant, couples that were pregnant, a young blossoming love, couple that actually moved apart, split apart, but learned how to cultivate a deep, loving connection and friendship with each other. So conscious uncoupling. And then later, as it evolved more, and as the world in our country has evolved into greater expressions of embracing love, then to same-sex couples, a male and female couple. So everything just lined up in the perfect way, and I really believe it's because I was open and listening and just inviting in the perfect resources and the perfect people.
Well, let's start with some specifics. I am fascinated by the older people that you photographed, and certainly since that's happening for me to be older, I wonder, as a photographer, do you see beauty in this?
I think it's a really important question and topic because in our culture, I'll start by prefacing, I think that in our culture, we're so indoctrinated, especially in the West, to thinking that as we age, we need to look young or we need to have the perfect bodies. And that's another thing that I really learned more from working on this book was seeing the absolute beauty in bodies as we age. And because love transcends form, right? You know, love really goes beyond form. And if you are really devoted to somebody, let's say you get married or you're together from the time you're young and you've got these beautiful, striking bodies, the likelihood of them looking like that in 40, 50 years is pretty unlikely. So I think it's it's really important that we learn how to see the beauty as we age. And I'm not perfect with it. You know, I mean, it's not easy to not be influenced by all of the, I would call it propaganda around us. You know, I think it is propaganda for advertising in one form or another, for, you know, for keeping yourself looking young, or thinking that you need to look young, so you buy products or you do whatever you need to do. And the truth is that this is what I found, is that the more that I'm with people and photograph people that are aging or that are perhaps quite old, even in their 80s and 90s, being able to see and really, truly, authentically experience the beauty of the lines and the age and the wisdom and the maturity that life has brought them, you know. And so I believe that when we see lines on somebody, and I apply this to myself all the time too, that those are wisdom lines, you know, those are wisdom tributaries, you know, to the courses and the paths and hopefully the great learnings and wisdom that we've gained over the years.
That is very special. Your book does show that you see something beyond the societal view of things, that you see deeply. In fact, my definition of a great photograph is one that creates transformation. So in some ways, looking at your older images, I found them very healing for me personally. So let's talk a little bit more about who else is in your book.
Yes.
Besides you and your wife, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a picture of us at the very end. I think it's the last image. And it's one shot in the late 90s when I was heavily involved with photographing this. And Carla, the woman of the oldest couple I was just talking about, she's a photographer, she was, and she wanted to take pictures of us. So that picture where we're embracing, I call it the hair shot because we both have a lot of hair going on. So God, every couple, there's 8 couples in the book, and every one, when I think about them, I feel like they all have such great wisdom in what they share, because each couple shares from such a vulnerable place. And before I get into specifics, I'll talk about one theme that I would say is coherent. If you were to ask me, like, what would be the most coherent theme that weaves its way throughout this book and throughout what each couple is sharing and portraying in their pictures, I would say it is one of trust. And how do we anchor more deeply within ourselves and with our partner in deeper trust? And then what does that mean? How does that ripple out into a growing, evolving conscious partnership? So there's so many layers to that. And, you know, I could talk for hours just about that theme, because it really weaves its way through every single couple's interview. But I would say one common thing that everybody shares about trust is that it's an inside job, right? We need to learn how to trust within ourselves first, to be trusting within our own inner guidance, with our own inner listening, with our own inner sense about who we are, and that we need to do our own inner work so that we can meet somebody and meet them in that deeper place of trust, so that when we do get scared, because I don't know anyone in a relationship that has not gotten scared, that when we do get scared, that we will choose to, hopefully sooner than later, come around and be willing to open up and learn how to be vulnerable and learn how to have enough trust within ourselves so that we can share our innermost fears, our innermost concerns, all of that with our partner, and allow them the loving, trusting space for them to be able to share with us as well. And that's what I see continues to cultivate deeper intimacy.
Yeah, but you bring up one of the biggest professional questions in your field that I can ask, and that is, those couples have trust, but how do you gain their trust? I mean, letting a third person into the equation isn't easy.
Yeah, you know, when I was with each couple, and even when I came back many years later and did the male couple and the female couple, the same thing applied. I would walk in, I would prepare in such a way, meaning that I would greet them and who they are and honoring who they are in their relationship with such a deep level of respect, like I'm going into one of the holiest of temples, holiest experiences. And I do sense that that energy transmits when we are so anchored in that level of honoring and being with a person and just cultivating that, God, I see you, you know, like an avatar, you know, I see you. And when somebody, I do believe that when someone genuinely feels like they're seen by you, then they are so much more easily willing to open and feel safe and let you in because they know, they trust your intention. And I think all these couples really deeply got and they really trusted my intention. And of course it didn't hurt in the beginning when I was first starting to photograph some of the initial couples. It didn't hurt to have the endorsement of Kenny Loggins, who a well-known figure, to help give it some immediate sort of credibility at that point too.
Well, that's extraordinary, though, that you talk about your process. You have photographed some of the most important people on the planet. The Dalai Lama, Tim Robbins. I could keep going down the list. Let's talk about some of them, for example.
Okay. Yeah, well, the Dalai Lama is a perfect segue because I had the opportunity to photograph him at this conference in Dharamsala, where he lives in India, in 1999. It was the first synthesis dialogues put on by Association for Global New Thought. And all these visionaries were coming from around the world to really dialogue with him about new paradigms for peace for the new millennium. And being in his presence, and some of the time it was quite close and quite intimate, it really changed my life because I got to witness how 100% present and authentic he was with every single person that he was with. Anyone that was standing up and having dialogue with him, he never lost eye contact unless he was looking over to ask his interpreter something. And he was just completely honoring. And the first time that I met him, when he was walking up the path on the first day of the conference, he sees me on the side of the path. I'm taking pictures, and he comes up to me, and he greeted me like he knew me, like I was this long-lost friend that he hadn't seen in ages. And he comes up off the path and says, "Hello!" And so that was my greeting. That was my first experience with him. And it truly did open me in a certain way where it showed me how a possibility of how we can be, how we can show up, truly show up and be authentic with people. And when we are, then magic happens and you know, anything can happen from that place.
Well, before we go to the next celebrity, which you have several, who was, without naming names, because every photographer is also gifted by a difficult shoot. So can you think of a very difficult subject without necessarily revealing who?
Oh, I can say their name because I've talked about it in one of my talks too. Because I look back at it and it's funny now. You know, it was James Brown, and I was doing an album cover for him. And first off, before he drives up in a motorcade, and these two young crew cut Secret Service looking guys get out of the limo, and Unit 1, yeah, they survey the grounds, and Unit 1 tells Unit 2 the coast is clear for Mr. Brown to come in. So he comes in with his entourage, and we're in a line, and he's shaking everybody's hand. James Brown, James Brown, James Brown. So he goes into the makeup room. He uses my makeup woman's kit. She never did a thing because his wife had done makeup, so he had her do everything. And we designed this beautiful backdrop, a painted backdrop that looked like you saw the galaxies. He's standing on the moon. It looks like he's standing on the moon, and you have Saturn and all these other planets in the background. And the whole point was that it looks like he's doing his moves on the moon and in the middle of the universe, because the name of the album is called Universal James, and that was his concept. He wanted to be the center of the universe, right? So I put on his music. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I'm just going to have him do his moves while I'm shooting, you know, put his songs on and have him do his famous moves. And I asked him to do that. And he goes, nah, I'm first off, I could only understand about a third of what he was saying. So I had to kind of piece it all together. And he's like, I don't do that. This is what I do. So he starts voguing and just doing these silly, corny moves like, you know, things like that. And, you know, and so fortunately some of them worked, but it was really clear that he was only willing to take a very small bit of direction because he knew what he wanted, and this is what he wanted, and this is what you did. And that's the way it was. But it made a great story afterward, though.
It reminds me briefly, I did television interviewing for 25 years. The only person who ever froze on the set was a psychologist. You know, the people that you think are most comfortable would be the ones that would freeze. So
Right.
thank you for that story. Now, who are some of the other people that you really have photographed? I know Paul McCartney's among them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, he was a huge influence on me. The Beatles growing up had such a huge influence on me. I would say that they were like my older brothers. They felt like, you know, where they represented when I was a kid, because they hit the scene in '64 and I was 9 years old. So really, and I was getting into music even before then. So from the time that they hit the scene, it's like I grew up with them, and it felt like as they evolved, I was growing. You know, so by the time that I became a teenager, they were doing much more sophisticated music, and George Harrison was writing these spiritual songs that really influenced me as well. I don't think I realized it so much when I was 14, but later I really did. You know, some of them were more obvious, like My Sweet Lord, but a lot of his songs were extremely spiritual and about the oneness and the connection of things. So both Harrison and McCartney, I had the opportunity to be with and to photograph, and it was, you know, I felt like after the Dalai Lama, George Harrison, and Paul McCartney, that I could just hang up my hat. You know, it's like, okay, you know, those would probably be the top three on my list, and those all happened, you know, in the '90s. So, but McCartney, I had the opportunity to spend 2 days with while he was doing shooting a video at Skywalker Ranch in Northern California. They were using Industrial Light and Magic, their special effects. So he was flying around, and so they wanted me to come in and document production stills, but then take them aside and do portraits as well. And so at that time, it was all film in '92. So I brought a ton of film with me. I shot a lot. I still have, I mean, now this is grace. I'm telling you that my career has been laced with grace, because had this been an album cover going through a record company, I would have signed contracts. They would have taken everything from me. I would have done a buyout, and I wouldn't have owned or had any of this material. They might have given me the rights to use a few shots for my own publicity, but that's it. But in this case, because it was in the context I was sharing, I didn't sign anything over. So I own all this material. So I'm able to still share it and do gallery showings. You know, I can't legally, with a well-known person, you can't create product unless you get their license. It's a licensing thing, you know, so I don't do that. But I'm so grateful that I've got these gems, these images that are so diverse, both black and white in color, of him and of George Harrison as well. Same applied for Harrison, where I covered 2 weeks of a 3-week tour of his in Japan. And, you know, it was life-changing. He's just such a beautiful spiritual man. In fact, I just posted yesterday on Instagram one of the photos from those shows. And as I was saying, because he influenced me so deeply spiritually, meeting him, I had the opportunity to share tea with he and his wife Olivia for an hour, and all we talked about was spirituality and meditation. And that was one of the, if someone was to ask me, like, count on one hand your 5 most significant, impactful experiences in your life, that would probably be one of them, just because he was such a significant teacher for me. But he wouldn't have wanted to hear that. He was so humble. And if anything, to the degree that he did not want any reference of praise or even acknowledgement, he would interpret in some way like, now you're putting me on a pedestal, which I would never, that wouldn't be my intention. But it was interesting because when I was with him, we had that hour of deep connection. And then before I left, I was thinking in my mind, I need to acknowledge him because he's no different than anyone else. So I'm not going to not acknowledge him because of a concern that I just shared. So I did. And I just shared with him the impact, the influence that he had and helped me open to spirituality. And I watched him a little bit, just kind of shut down a little bit for the reason that I just shared, because he just so, by this point in his life, by the early 90s, he just so did not want to be associated as being different than anybody else. He devoted probably more than music. He devoted so many years of the last part of his life in his garden, being a gardener, and connecting with the earth. And so the reason why they invited me during one of the, during this show to connect with them is because they sensed that I was sharing a similar spiritual acknowledgement, and that they could meet me in this place of oneness, which was so beautiful and so moving to me.
A tougher question for you. Obviously, you've referenced photographs that you have done in the 90s, and you were obviously very good, or you wouldn't have gotten to do those photographs. But I bet you see more now than you did even then. Are your photographs different from this period as compared to that period? I'm not talking about the subject matter, but the way that you see, is it different?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good question, Phyllis. Because as I continue to grow and evolve, and I think deepen in my level of compassion and presence, and just honor of people and honor of this earth, I believe that when I'm with people, it's more clear, it's more obvious that energy gets transmitted even more now. And, so when I think about all those, I did a ton of those shoots that we're talking about in my 30s. That was just the time. That was the time I was in LA. That was the zone. I was following my passion. And then later it went on to photographing other luminaries as well. But I wouldn't want to go back to that time, meaning that I'd never want to go back to my 20s. Man, that was just hard. But the 30s, even that, I wouldn't want to go back to, because I so appreciate the greater awareness that I continue to receive as I mature, as I age. And that's priceless. So just less struggle, more of a recognition of honoring what's a fit and what's not. That's something I continue to learn. I've had my business almost 40 years, and I continue to always learn, because we're always getting that opportunity to see, to sort of assess whether it's in a relationship with somebody or a business situation or any decision we make, whether it's a fit, whether it's an energetic fit, whether it's a fit on many different levels. And I think in my 20s and definitely in my 30s, I was still a lot of the time trying to make something a fit that necessarily wasn't a fit. And as I mature, I just recognize pretty quickly if a situation is an energetic fit or not. And if it's not, okay. That saved a lot of time.
Speaking of that, I have a new plan, because I don't want to blanket the earth as if to say it's the troubled time, but it feels like it's a little bit of a difficult time for many people. Mm-hmm. And since you are steeped in transformational work and teaching, I want to give each guest on the show a chance to reflect on what they might offer up for this time, either a solution, an idea, an observation. Do you have any thoughts? Since you've written The Evolution of Loving, I think you're a good person to ask this question of.
So what I'd like to see happen is that we all use this time, which feels very challenging right now, as an opportune time to go deeper within, to first off, to breathe and to sense that we are here for our own unique purpose, to give. How can we tap into the fullness of what our unique gifts are and learn how to be the most effective, loving conduits for change, the change that we want to see. And the greater that we are willing every day to start our days from that place and open to the possibilities of, how can I show up and do my own inner work and be the most loving presence and greet people that I feel adverse with or situations and discover ways to bring light to the darkness in whatever way that we can do that. And that, I believe, is, as everyone that has that consciousness and intention puts their attention there, then the acts that we take from that place, the social acts that we take, the loving acts, the personal, the political, all the acts that we take will have the opportunity, they'll be based in what our intention is. And if our intention is one of union and oneness and people recognizing that we need at this time more than ever to see that we're all one, that the time is no longer here for division. We're quickly going and passing beyond that point. Then we can feel more empowered because we can feel like we are touching people in a way that's not from adversity. And because adversity only fuels adversity. So
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Carl Studna. This has been a pleasure. A glimpse into your very beautiful book, The Evolution of Loving. I recommend it because just looking at the pictures, it causes transformation. And then reading the text is so filling. Thank you so very much.
It's such a pleasure to be with you, Phyllis. Thank you so much for having me.